I was getting ready for bed that night, nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Just an old man folding his shirt with the same quiet routine he's had since his wife passed. My room was dim, the kind of dim that settles into your bones when you've lived long enough to know what real silence feels like. I bent down to pick up a slipper I must have kicked under the bed earlier, and that's when I saw it. A faint glint. A tiny reflection staring back at me from the shadows. At first, I thought it was just my glasses catching the light, happens more often these days. But something told me to look again. So I pushed my fingers under the frame of the bed and pulled. A small black device slid out. Cold. Light. Wrong. My heart slammed against my ribs. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. I knew exactly what it was the moment I saw that tiny lens, one of those miniature cameras people hide in hotel vents and office plants. I'd seen videos online. Never thought I'd be holding one in my own bedroom. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, feeling every year of my age pressed down on me. Who would put something like this in my home? Why here, my bedroom? And then the worst thought hit me. Someone had been watching me. Watching me in the one place I still felt safe. Before I go any further, if you're into real, raw stories like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Trust me, this one only gets heavier. Because that night, staring at that hidden camera, a feeling washed over me that I hadn't felt since the day I buried my wife. A deep, hollow kind of loneliness mixed with something uglier, betrayal. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment I discovered who put it there. And why. And that was only the beginning. Before that camera showed up under my bed, my life was quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into a house when the person who used to fill it with laughter, nagging, humming, and warmth is gone forever. When my wife died 3 years ago, the silence didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, room by room, until it felt like it was wrapped around my throat. I'm in my late 60s now, and people assume you get used to loneliness at this age. You don't. You just stop fighting it because fighting requires energy, and energy is something grief drains out of you drop by drop. My days followed a simple routine. I woke early because old men do, the body becomes an alarm clock you never asked for. I made tea, stared at the spot at the table where she used to sit, and forced myself to pretend mornings didn't hurt. Then I'd walk around the house checking things, locks, lights, faucets, because that's what you do when you've lived long enough to understand how quickly life can slip out of your hands. My children visited now and then. Not out of love, not really. More out of obligation, and because they had their own quiet war going on about who would handle me as I got older. They didn't say it that bluntly, but I'm not stupid. I could hear the tension behind their smiles, the judgment in their questions, the frustration in their sighs when I insisted on doing things myself. They wanted control. I wanted dignity. And those two things rarely coexist peacefully. My oldest daughter, especially, had started talking to me like I was a misbehaving toddler. Every time she visited, she'd point out some imaginary hazard in the house. Dad, that rug is dangerous. Dad, you shouldn't be cooking alone. Dad, maybe it's time to think about assisted living. It wasn't concern. Real concern doesn't come with that much impatience. My son was quieter but more strategic. He brought up finances every chance he got, slipping questions into conversations like poison into tea. Dad, what's the situation with the house? Do you have everything updated in your will? Have you thought about letting someone help manage your accounts? He always said it calmly, kindly, but there was an edge beneath it. A motive he thought I couldn't sense. They were circling me. Slowly. Not for my safety, no. For the things I owned and the control they wanted. Still, I pretended not to notice, because pretending kept the peace, and peace was easier than confrontation. I let them talk over me, I let them rearrange things in the house, I let them judge my choices. I'm an old man, sometimes silence is the only weapon you have left. But in between all that posturing, there were good moments too. Days when I felt the presence of my wife and the creak of the floorboards or the rustle of curtains. Days when the air in the house didn't feel heavy. Days when my independence felt like something I could still defend. If someone had told me back then that my own family would cross a line so severe it would change everything, absolutely everything, I would have laughed. Or maybe I would have cried, because deep down I always knew they were capable of going too far. But I never imagined they'd go this far. I never imagined they'd violate my home, my privacy, my sanity, in the name of control. Back then, before the cameras, before the lies, before the plans they made behind my back, I still believed my home was mine. I still believed my children respected me. And most tragically, I still believed family could never become an enemy. I was wrong. Looking back now, the signs were there long before I ever saw that first camera. They were small, so small that anyone else might have ignored them. But when you live alone, you know the rhythm of your home. You know the way your shoes line up by the door, the way the kitchen smells after breakfast, the way the floorboards sound when you walk across them. When that rhythm changes, even subtly, you feel it in your gut. The first thing I noticed was my bedroom window. I always leave it locked. Always. But one morning, when I went to pull back the curtains, the latch was flipped open. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to make sense of it. Did I forget? Did I do it at night and not remember? The thought irritated me more than the latch itself. I don't like feeling confused, not at my age, not with the way my children treat me, always searching my words for signs of decline. Then came the lights. Some mornings I'd wake up and find the hallway light on. A few times, the kitchen switch was flicked up, even though I know damn well I turned everything off before bed. I brushed it off, but a knot settled in my stomach. I started second-guessing myself. And that's what scared me the most. There was a day I spent almost 20 minutes searching for my watch. I found it later, sitting neatly on the dresser like someone placed it there deliberately. Too neatly. My wife used to tidy things that way. My children never have. They're clumsy, hurried people. This was different. One afternoon, I heard the faintest creak in the hallway behind me. Not my house settling. Not pipes. A step. Oh wait. I turned quickly, heart racing, nothing. Just an empty corridor, still and dim. I stood there, listening so hard my ears rang. And then there was the phone call. My daughter rang me one afternoon and mentioned, casually, "Dad, you should really stop pacing around so much. It's not good for your knees." I froze. I hadn't told her anything about my day. She couldn't have seen me pacing. She tried to correct herself when she heard the silence on my end, but the damage was done. That single sentence felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. How did she know? Around that time, my son became strangely confident in describing the layout of my bedroom, specific details he shouldn't have remembered. My nightstand arrangement. The way my bed was positioned. The old armchair I rarely used. Little comments, slipped in like harmless observations, each one hitting me like a needle. Something was wrong. Something was happening right under my nose. But every time I considered bringing it up, a part of me held back. My children already spoke to me like I was fragile. If I told them I thought things were moving on their own or lights were changing or footsteps were echoing, they'd twist that into an excuse to take over everything. They'd use it against me. So I kept quiet. And waited. And watched. But the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the humiliation that maybe they were right to doubt me, that maybe I was forgetting things, slipping mentally, losing my grip. I didn't know then that this confusion wasn't an accident. It wasn't age. And it sure as hell wasn't my imagination. It was the beginning of their plan. A plan designed to break me down slowly, piece by piece, until I wouldn't resist what they truly wanted. And I walked right into it. Finding that first camera rattled me, but what truly broke something inside me was discovering the second one. That moment stripped every illusion I still had about my safety, my sanity, and worst of all, my family. It happened 3 days after I found the first device. 3 days of pretending nothing was wrong while every nerve in my body screamed otherwise. 3 days of checking over my shoulder in my own home, walking slowly, listening carefully, feeling the walls closing in on me. I acted normal around my children, but inside, I was a storm. I kept the first camera hidden in a drawer, wrapped in one of my wife's old scarves like I was afraid it would bite me. I slept badly those nights. Not because of nightmares, but because I couldn't stop replaying every moment from the past month, every strange detail, every comment from my kids, every misplaced object. I wasn't imagining anything. Something was happening. Someone had been inside my home. Someone had watched me. By the morning of the third day, my hands were trembling every time I touched a doorknob. I was afraid to open cabinets. Afraid to shower. Afraid to sit still. My house had become a cage with invisible eyes. That afternoon, while I was dusting the bookshelf, something I only do when I'm anxious, I noticed a tiny circle carved into the wood. A hole no bigger than a pencil tip. I leaned closer, squinting. For a moment, I thought it was just a natural dent in the old shelf, but the edges were too clean, too deliberate. A cold wave ran through me. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it through the hole. On the other side, something metallic reflected the light back at me. I felt my knees weaken. I pressed my fingers against the back of the shelf and felt a small, smooth object taped behind the row of books. When I pulled it free, my heart nearly stopped. Another camera. Newer than the first. Better hidden. Positioned perfectly to watch the entire room. That was the moment everything inside me collapsed. Someone didn't just slip one camera in my home out of panic or poor judgment. This was intentional. Planned. Rehearsed. Someone had taken their time. Someone had returned more than once. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. I sat on the floor with the camera in my hands, and something inside me cracked wide open. I'm not ashamed to admit it, I cried. Not like a child, not like someone scared. I cried like a man whose last bit of dignity had been ripped away. Hard, quiet, chest-tightening tears. It wasn't just the invasion. It was the confirmation that my children, my own blood, saw me as a problem to be managed, monitored, controlled. Maybe even eliminated from the equation in whatever way benefited them most. My breathing turned shaky. My thoughts scattered. The room spun for a moment, and I had to steady myself against the shelf. But then shock turned into clarity. I got up, wiped my face, and started searching the room methodically. Under the bed again. Behind the dresser. Inside the closet. In the vent. I checked places I didn't even know I could reach. My shirt soaked with sweat. My fingers raw. My heart pounding like a war drum. I didn't find a third device, but the absence of one didn't comfort me. It only made me wonder what I still hadn't discovered. By evening, my fear had hardened into something colder, resolve. This wasn't just about surveillance. This was about power. Control. Maybe inheritance. Maybe forcing me into assisted living. Maybe something worse. Whatever their plan was, it wasn't love. And it wasn't protection. They were preparing to push me out of my own life, one carefully planted doubt at a time. I placed the second camera beside the first in the drawer. I stared at them for a long time, feeling the weight of betrayal sink deeper into my chest. This wasn't just an invasion of privacy. It was a declaration. My own family had crossed a line. And I was finally ready to confront the truth behind it. I didn't sleep the night I found the second camera. I sat in my armchair with the lights off, the house silent except for the ticking wall clock. Every hour that passed made the truth sharper, heavier, impossible to ignore. I was being watched, monitored like a lab animal. And the people who had access to my home, the only ones who knew my routines well enough to slip in unnoticed, were my own children. That realization hit me like a slow, suffocating wave. I spent hours staring at the cameras I'd lined up on the table. 2 small devices, simple, cheap, easy to buy. But their real cost was the trust they destroyed. I kept thinking about my wife. What she'd say if she saw me like that, old, exhausted, betrayed in the very home we built together. Around dawn, I forced myself to start thinking clearly. Fear wasn't going to protect me. Confusion wasn't going to help me. If my children were willing to spy on me, then whatever they were planning wasn't harmless. And if I didn't stay sharp, I'd play right into their hands. So I made a decision: I treat this like a crime scene. I grabbed a notebook and wrote down every detail from the last month. Strange noises. Objects moved. Comments my kids made. The unexpected visits. Their sudden push to get me evaluated by a doctor. Their subtle hints about my will. All of it. The more I wrote, the more everything aligned into an ugly pattern I wished I hadn't recognized. They were building a narrative. A story that made me look forgetful, careless, unstable. A story that justified taking control of my life and property. I took photos of the cameras, front, back, serial numbers. I documented where I found each one. I didn't know if I'd need the evidence later, but something in my gut told me this was no longer a family matter. This was a battle. I considered calling the police, but I hesitated. Not because I feared my children getting in trouble, no, they made their choices. What held me back was something deeper. Once you involve outsiders, you can never come back from it. The family you once had becomes a memory. Still, a darker thought kept whispering in the back of my mind. If they were willing to do this, what would they do next? That question lingered like a shadow behind every breath. Later that morning, I sat in the kitchen staring at my phone, debating which child to call first. Should I confront them separately? Together? Should I give them a chance to lie to my face? Should I act clueless and see what slips out? My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a building anger I hadn't felt since my younger days. A part of me, the part that had survived loss, heartbreak, and the cruelty of life, began to rise. They underestimated me. They thought age made me powerless. They thought grief dulled my instincts. They thought they could manipulate me quietly, corner me gently, take everything without resistance. They forgot who raised them. They forgot what I endured long before they were born. They forgot I wasn't the type of man who folds under pressure. I looked around the house, really looked, and realized something painful: my home wasn't mine anymore. It had become a stage for their scheme, a place where they collected evidence against me, watched me, judged me, cornered me. That truth lit a fire in my chest. By afternoon, I knew exactly what I needed to do. No more pretending. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. It was time to face this situation with a clear head and a spine made of iron. They thought they were controlling the narrative. They thought they had me confused and dependent. But they had no idea that by planting those cameras, they'd awakened the wrong man. Once I accepted that my own children had planted those cameras, the question that kept gnawing at me was why. What drove them to invade my bedroom, my privacy, my dignity? What made them feel entitled to cross the line between concern and control? I spent the next day sitting at the dining table with a cup of cold tea, replaying every recent conversation I'd had with them. Every look. Every hesitation. Every moment they thought I wouldn't notice. It didn't take long before the pieces started lining up like a puzzle I'd been too blind or too trusting to finish. It began a few months earlier, right after I told them I wasn't selling the house. They'd pushed the idea gently at first, then more aggressively. They said it was too big for me, too much work, too lonely. But it wasn't about any of that. My wife and I built this home together. Every corner has her fingerprints. Giving it up would have felt like burying her all over again. My refusal changed something in them. I saw it in my son's eyes, the way they hardened for a split second before he forced a smile. My daughter stopped hiding her frustration. She started making comments about responsibility, about how families have to step in when elders resist change. Elders. Like I was a burden to be managed. Then came the financial conversations. My son kept circling the topic of my will, asking if it was updated, who the executor was, whether the house would transfer smoothly. He said he wanted to avoid complications. I wasn't oblivious. He was calculating something. And I knew he wanted control of the property more than anything. My daughter pushed the medical angle. She brought up articles about cognitive decline, slipped pamphlets for senior evaluations onto my table, tried to convince me that I'd been forgetting things. At the time, I thought she was just being overbearing. But now, with everything that had happened, it was obvious. They weren't worried about my health. They were building a case against me. The cameras weren't a desperate move, they were part of a long-term strategy. They wanted evidence. Footage of me misplacing items, forgetting things, pacing anxiously, waking up disoriented. A curated collection of moments they could twist into proof that I couldn't live alone or handle my own affairs. And once they had enough, they'd move me somewhere they controlled the narrative completely. I remembered a conversation from 2 weeks before the discovery, one that should have alarmed me more than it did. My daughter had said, "Dad, I worry you're getting overwhelmed. Maybe you don't notice it yet, but we do." My son added, "Don't make things harder than they need to be." At the time, those words stung. Now they burned. Because they finally made sense. My children weren't planning to help me. They were planning to overtake me. They wanted the house, the accounts, the decision-making power. They wanted to put my life into their hands, whether I agreed or not. But another thought crept in, darker than the rest. What if this wasn't just about greed? What if they wanted to finish something that had started the day my wife died? She was the barrier. The shield. She would have fought them tooth and nail. But with her gone, I was the last obstacle between them and whatever future they envisioned for themselves. I felt my chest tighten, not from fear, but from betrayal so deep it felt like a wound. I looked at the cameras on my table again. 2 little devices I didn't ask for. 2 symbols of how far they were willing to go. 2 reminders that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Understanding their motive didn't make the situation easier, it made it worse. Because now I knew exactly what they wanted, and I knew they wouldn't stop. People don't give up on a plan once they've invested time, effort, and secrecy into it. They push harder. So if they were determined to take my autonomy, I'd have to be twice as determined to protect it. They thought age made me slow. But age only made me patient. And patience, in a war like this, is power. I spent the night before the confrontation sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at the drawer where the 2 cameras were hidden. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned itself out, leaving behind something sharper, clarity. They'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and I wasn't going to let them think they'd gotten away with it. By morning, I knew exactly how I would handle things. I wasn't going to call them screaming or accuse anyone over the phone. Known people reveal more when they believe they're in control. So I called my son and daughter separately, each under the pretense of wanting a simple family discussion. I told them to come over that afternoon. I kept my voice steady, calm, almost warm. That was the first strike. Let them think I was clueless. My son arrived first, confident as always. He walked into the house like he already owned it, tossing his keys on the table, asking how I slept. I watched him closely, every twitch, every glance toward the hallway, every subtle calculation in his eyes. He looked around the house too carefully, like he was checking to see whether anything had been moved. My daughter came a few minutes later. She greeted me with a forced cheeriness, hugging me a second too long, like she was trying to read my heartbeat through my shirt. Her eyes scanned my face the moment she pulled away, searching for signs of confusion, maybe hoping to find weakness she could use. I invited them into the living room. I didn't sit down. I needed them to feel the tension, even if they couldn't name it yet. I asked you both here, I said, because there's something we need to talk about. Something important. They exchanged a quick look. Familiar. Guilty. Anticipatory. My son folded his arms slowly. My daughter clasped her hands together like she was preparing a speech. I didn't drag it out. I opened the drawer beside me, pulled out the 2 cameras, and placed them on the table between us. My daughter's smile collapsed instantly. My son's jaw clenched so hard I heard a crack. Neither of them spoke. I waited. Silence is a tool older people learn to wield well. Finally, my daughter whispered, "Dad, what is that?" I didn't answer with anger. I didn't need to. "You tell me," I said. My son exhaled sharply, shook his head, and muttered, "Where did you find those?" I tilted my head. "Where you put them." The room froze. My daughter's eyes widened with a blend of panic and calculation. My son opened his mouth as if he wanted to deny everything, but stopped. He wasn't fast enough this time. I saw the guilt hit him before his brain could assemble a lie. That was the second strike. My daughter reached out, voice trembling with false sincerity. "Dad, wait, maybe there's some kind of misunderstanding." "Stop," I said. One word. Firm. Controlled. Her mouth snapped shut. For a moment, no one breathed. Then my son finally spoke. "Dad, we were worried." The phrase was so predictable I almost laughed, but the bitterness in my chest wouldn't let me. "Worried?" I repeated. "Is that what you call planting cameras in your father's bedroom? Is that what you call sneaking into my home? Lying? Watching me?" My daughter's face flushed red. She tried again, voice shaky but rehearsed. "We didn't want to invade your privacy. It's just that, well, things have been happening. You've been stressed, forgetful." I cut her off. "No. You made sure I thought I was forgetting. You moved things. You staged it all. I know exactly what you've been doing." Her eyes filled with tears, real or fake, I couldn't tell. "Dad, you're blowing this out of proportion." I leaned forward, and for the first time in months, they saw the man who raised them, not the old man they thought they could corner. "You two aren't smart enough to gaslight me," I said quietly. "And even if you were, you should have remembered one thing: you're dealing with someone who survived more than you'll ever understand." "You think cameras and manipulation will break me?" My son looked away, guilt turning into defensiveness. "We just wanted to make sure you were okay," he said through clenched teeth. "You live alone. You don't get to monitor me like I'm an experiment." My daughter finally broke. "We needed proof, Dad," she blurted out, before immediately covering her mouth, realizing she'd said too much. Proof. There it was. The truth they desperately hoped wouldn't slip out. My son shot her a furious look, then turned back to me. "Dad, listen, things are complicated. We're trying to protect you from yourself." "No," I said. "You're trying to protect yourselves from me keeping my independence. From me keeping this house. From me keeping control of what belongs to me." The mask finally dropped. My son's voice hardened. "You can't live like this forever. Someone has to take over." Take over. The word struck like a blade, the kind you expect, but still feel deeply. I stood up slowly, letting the full weight of silence settle again. My voice was steady, deadly calm. "I know exactly what you planned. I know why you did it. And I know what you were hoping to gain. But hear me clearly, this ends now. Whatever game you started, whatever story you tried to build, it's over." They looked stunned, because they realized the narrative had slipped out of their hands. They had expected confusion, denial, weakness. Instead, they found steel. Neither of them spoke. Not a single word. And for the first time, they looked genuinely afraid. Because they finally understood something. I wasn't going to be their victim. I was going to be their consequence. The moment the confrontation broke open, the air in the living room changed. It wasn't tension anymore, it was exposure. Raw, uncomfortable exposure. My children finally realized I wasn't confused, fragile, or easily manipulated. I saw them clearly, and that terrified them. My daughter was the first to speak again. Her voice quivered, but she was trying hard to hold on to the story she'd rehearsed. "Dad, we weren't trying to hurt you. You have to believe that. We were just trying to keep you safe." Safe. That word felt like a slap. I turned to her slowly. Is that what you call sneaking into my home with cameras? Watching me while I sleep? Wondering how much more you could document before pushing me into an institution? Her face twisted with emotion, but I wasn't sure if it was guilt or irritation that her plan wasn't landing the way she expected. My son stepped in with his usual cold rationality. Dad, let's be honest here. You've been stressed. You've been forgetful. Things around the house are slipping. We were trying to monitor the situation so we could step in before something serious happened. Monitor the situation, I repeated, each word heavier than the last. That's how you see me now? A situation? He exhaled sharply. We needed evidence in case something happened. Evidence for what? I snapped. For court? For a doctor to sign papers? For a judge to hand you my life and my property on a silver platter? They fell silent. That silence confirmed what I already knew. My daughter tried a gentler angle. Dad, please, you're taking this the wrong way. We didn't want to embarrass you. We didn't want to upset you. We were worried, and you never listen when we try to help. Help? I said. That's your idea of help? She took a breath, gathering her words like weapons. You've been more emotional lately. You've been isolating yourself. You don't answer calls sometimes. You're not the same since Mom died. We didn't know how else to make sure you were okay. I stared at her. So instead of talking to me like adults, you decided to spy on me like criminals? My son stepped forward, frustration finally cracking through his composure. Dad, stop acting like we betrayed you. Families do this kind of thing all the time when someone is struggling. We were trying to protect everyone involved. I laughed, short, cold. Protect everyone, or protect your inheritance? His face hardened instantly. He didn't deny it. That told me everything. My daughter's tears finally spilled. Dad, don't say that. This isn't about money. We just want what's best for you. What's best for me, I said, is being treated with respect. What's best for me is being spoken to, not spied on. What's best for me is being trusted, not monitored like I'm unstable. Neither of them could argue with that. They tried to, but the words died in their throats. I stepped closer, looking each of them in the eyes, the way a parent does when they want their children to understand the seriousness of a moment. You didn't do this out of love, I said quietly. You did it because you assumed you could get away with it. You thought I was too old to notice. Too lonely to question you. Too broken to defend myself. My son swallowed hard. My daughter wiped her face. You wanted control, I continued. And when I didn't hand it over, you decided to take it. The truth hung between us like smoke, thick, bitter, undeniable. They looked small suddenly. Not because I towered over them, but because the weight of their actions finally settled on their shoulders. You talk about protecting me, I said, but you never thought about the damage you were doing. You never considered what it would feel like to discover those cameras. To realize my own children didn't see me as a father anymore, just an obstacle. My voice didn't shake. Theirs did. The reality was simple and brutal. They wanted justification. I lived the consequences. And now that the truth was out, there was no going back. After they left my house that day, the silence felt different. It wasn't the familiar quiet of a widower missing his wife. It wasn't the lonely hush of an aging man living alone. This silence had edges. It had weight. It had truth in it. For the first time in months, I wasn't confused. I wasn't doubting myself. I wasn't walking around wondering if the creaks in the hallway were in my head or if my memory was slipping. Everything finally made sense, painfully, brutally, but clearly. And when clarity arrives, it demands action. I stood in the living room long after the front door shut behind them, staring at the empty space where they had stood. All I felt was exhaustion and a kind of grief I hadn't experienced before. When you lose a spouse, the world goes quiet. When you lose trust in your own children, the world tilts. But I didn't crumble. I didn't sink into fear or self-pity. Age might slow the body, but it sharpens the instincts of a man who's lived through loss. And right then, those instincts told me one thing. If I didn't take back control of my home and my life immediately, they'd try again, just smarter, quieter, deeper. So I made the first hard choice. That night, I changed every lock on my doors with my own 2 hands. Slow work, careful work, but mine. I didn't call a locksmith. I didn't want anyone else knowing what I was doing or where I was vulnerable. When the new locks clicked into place, I felt something loosen in my chest. My home belonged to me again. The next morning, I gathered every camera, every battery, every scrap of tape, and stored them in a sealed box. I didn't throw anything away. Evidence isn't trash. Evidence is leverage. And leverage is the only language people with hidden motives understand. The second hard choice came shortly after. I called a lawyer. Not because I wanted to sue my own children, but because I needed to know how far they could go and how far I could go to protect myself. The lawyer listened quietly, too quietly at times, and when I finished, he told me something I already suspected. If my children built a narrative around declining capacity, they could take everything from me with the right signatures and the right pressure. He told me the cameras changed everything. They weren't just a violation. They were proof of intent. That confirmation made my blood run cold, but it also gave me power. I updated my will. I assigned durable powers to someone outside the family, someone neutral, someone I trusted. I structured my estate in a way that no one could quietly override my wishes again. These weren't emotional decisions. They were protective ones. Necessary ones. Then I created distance. I didn't answer my children's calls for a while. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. Their apologies came quickly, as I expected. Messages layered with guilt, explanations, attempts to paint their actions as missteps or concern taken too far. But the tone of those messages wasn't remorse, it was fear. They were afraid of losing access to the life they had planned for themselves through me. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't dramatize anything. Instead, I gave them boundaries, firm, immovable boundaries. If they wanted to see me, it had to be on my terms. If they wanted to talk about my health, it had to be with respect. If they wanted to be in my home again, it would only happen with my permission and full transparency. Some relationships don't break loudly. They fracture slowly, then collapse all at once. That's what happened between us. A quiet collapse. But I didn't regret a single step I took. Because protecting yourself doesn't make you cruel. It makes you awake. And for the first time in far too long, I wasn't the confused old man they wanted me to be. I was in control. And I wasn't giving that up again ever. When the dust finally settled, the house felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I had changed. For months, I'd walked through these rooms second-guessing my mind, doubting my senses, questioning my own stability. Now, every step I took was deliberate. Solid. Mine. Taking back your life at my age isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. Methodical. A series of small choices that rebuild you from the inside out. I started with my mornings. I returned to the routine my wife and I used to share, tea by the window, a quiet moment before the world wakes. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a ritual of loneliness. It felt like a reclaiming of space. A reclaiming of memory. A reclaiming of myself. Then I began fixing the small things around the house that I'd ignored for too long, the loose kitchen drawer, the flickering porch light, the squeaky hinge on the guest room door. Every repair felt symbolic, like I was tightening the bolts of my own spine. I opened my windows more often, too. Not because I needed fresh air, because I refused to let fear turn my home into a cage again. Some days were harder. I'd stumble across something that reminded me of my children before everything soured, a photo, an old birthday card, and the ache would rise. But pain doesn't control me anymore. I acknowledge it, and then I move forward. And the truth is, taking back my life wasn't just about shutting my children out. It was about letting my dignity back in. I began walking in the neighborhood again. When people asked how I was doing, I told them the truth, not the whole story, but enough to stand up straight. Enough to remind myself that I am still capable, still present, still in command. And at the end of each day, when I turned off the lights and locked the doors, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Before I continue, if stories like this resonate with you, stories about survival, betrayal, and rebuilding, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more people find these narratives, and it means a lot. Reclaiming my life wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triumphant. It was steady. Honest. And every step forward reminded me of one truth. They tried to break me quietly. But I rebuilt myself loudly. Even if the world never heard a sound. When everything finally quieted, I found myself sitting in the same armchair where I discovered the truth about my children's betrayal. Only this time, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt honest. For the first time in a long while, I could hear my own thoughts without fear twisting them into something else. I thought a lot about age, how people talk about it like it's a slow erasing of a person. As if growing older means losing your place in the world. But the truth is, age doesn't erase you. It unmasks everything around you. It exposes motives, intentions, loyalties. It reveals who sees you as a human being, and who sees you as a stepping stone. I learned that trust is fragile, even with family. Blood isn't a guarantee of loyalty. And real love, doesn't hide cameras in the dark. But I also learned something about myself. Something I hadn't acknowledged since my wife passed. I am still capable of standing up. I am still capable of protecting what's mine. I am still capable of choosing dignity over fear. People assume that being in your late 60s means giving in, stepping aside, letting others direct your life. But I'm living proof that you don't have to surrender. You can reclaim your boundaries. You can rebuild your strength. You can demand respect even from the people who think they're entitled to your downfall. My children may never understand the damage they caused. They may never admit what they tried to pull. But their choices forced me to rediscover parts of myself I thought were gone. Strength. Patience. Clarity. Resolve. And as I sit here now, looking around the home my wife and I built together, I feel something I wasn't sure I'd feel again. Certainty. This house is mine. My life is mine. My future, whatever remains of it, is mine. People say revenge is loud, dramatic, destructive. But sometimes, the quietest form of revenge is simply refusing to fall. And that's exactly what I did.